Hello, my name is Susie Fraser. I'm Director of Manchester Communication Research School. We are based in Manchester Communication Academy in North Manchester. And this webinar is focusing on effective professional development, reflecting on what happens in schools after that September INSET Day. And that September INSET Day probably feels like a distant memory now. It's a long time since the start of term. And it's worth thinking now about how much the emphasis from that day is still high on the priority list for everyone, not just senior leaders, not just yourselves as leaders of PD, but for everybody in the school. Do those priorities that were shared on that day maintain a priority in each and every classroom? What we know about PD is that we are very good at transferring knowledge and building knowledge of our teachers, sharing ideas and strategies that we want to see happen in the classroom, and hopefully sharing an understanding of what that will look like in a good way. But we know that there is a gap between the knowledge that teachers have, and particularly the knowledge that is shared on an INSET day, and what happens in classrooms, the knowing doing gap. And it's quite hard to bridge that gap, to think about how do we make teachers enact in a sustainable and regular way the strategies that they've developed during that first training day. You may recognise this from the most recent implementation guidance, and this implementation cycle identifies some of the key behaviours that you would go through the process of implementation. And many of those align with what happens when you lead professional development. So before that September INSET Day, you will have spent quite a bit of time thinking about what the focus should be, what the priorities should be, what the approach should be, and whether that fits with your context in your school. Then you'll have designed that training in September and prepared for its delivery, how it will be received by staff. Now we're in this second half of this process. So 6 weeks in, we're now thinking about how do we monitor whether those changes are happening in the classroom? How do we make amendments to that or tweaks to that? So we're continually improving on the implementation of that strategy in classrooms. And then we've got to think about how we maintain that effort as other priorities appear and as time goes on. This is also taken from that implementation guidance, and I think it's really good to provide a structured reflection really for professional development. So at this point, these 3 recommendations highlight some of the behaviours that we should see and some of the contextual factors that we should attend to. At this point in the term, we might be thinking about how well have we engaged people in that process of change, and what opportunities have there been to unite people around the importance of the strategy that you're wanting to implement or the teacher technique that you're prioritising, and also how are we getting feedback from teachers on what's going well with that, what are the things that they're finding quite difficult, how do we know that those things are being enacted with fidelity, how we intended them to be. It's also worth reflecting on the structures within your school as well, and whether they enable professional development priorities to take root. Have you got things in your school that are enablers, potentially teams and champions who support the rollout of a professional development priority? Or could there be some challenges to that? So that might be around meeting time, it could be around how professional development time is being taken up by other priorities and sharing information, blurring the purpose of PD, potentially being briefings rather than PD. So this gives us an opportunity to reflect at this point and to allow us to think about what changes need to be made as we move forward. This equally is helpful in that reflection process. So again, this is a structure really for the explore phase as you're beginning to identify what the priority should be, what your strategy should be. But that kind of second half there around how challenging is the approach is helpful in thinking about the long-term success that you might have. So if at this point through your reflection, you're potentially thinking that the change isn't happening as you would like it to, or the intention that you had in that September INSET Day hasn't quite come to fruition yet, it's worth trying to think about how challenging is that approach and whether there's a way to shrink the focus to be much more manageable. So for example, if you were focusing on something like cognitive load theory, that's quite a broad concept and it has lots of different complexities within it. And it can be challenging sometimes for teachers to know exactly what it is they should be doing in their classrooms to support that reduction of cognitive load. Similarly, metacognition, again, a very complex, a very common priority and discussion in schools, but can be really complex to know exactly what should be happening. So shrinking that challenge and making it really manageable, focusing in simply on the 7-step model or activating prior knowledge can be a way to start to build success in some of those behaviours that will lead to long-term change. And obviously not forgetting a reflection of the mechanism. So I'm sure you've seen this from the guidance on effective professional development, the evidence review telling us that if we include these 14 mechanisms in our design, then the better chance we've got of success. The evidence saying that the more mechanisms we have, the better, but equally they should be within this balanced design. So we should have an opportunity to build knowledge, an opportunity to motivate teachers, a way to develop teaching techniques, and that focus on embedding practice as well. And, you know, again, it's worth just thinking at this point, which of these mechanisms are fully embedded, and particularly for the embedding practice category, now is the time that you might start to focus on some of these mechanisms and revisit these so that you can continue with that monitoring and sustain the effort over time. I also think this is a very helpful infogram, if you like, diagram to show the process of professional development. And I think this is really useful to share with other people within school. Perhaps if you are collaborating around that reflection at this point, whether with your senior leadership team or with your team of teacher educators, or even with a working group of teachers who are enacting the teacher strategies that you've hoped to implement, going through this process with them can really be enlightening to what might need to change going forward. So if you're explicit about this is the knowledge that I wanted teachers to have, this is the skills and techniques that we were focusing on, this is what habits might look like, it's worth just giving that framework to assess whether those things are observable and noticeable in school. The same with the teacher behaviours. Are teachers what behaviours are teachers trying? What does it look like in the classroom? What feedback are they getting? And again, you can then focus on pupil change as well. So it's really useful to see this as a way of potentially structuring some reflection activities, structuring some quality assurance, having some conversations with teachers about, are we on the right track? Are we seeing some of these things? What do we need to change in order to give that the best chance? Just a reminder of the balanced design format. Again, this is really helpful to think about next steps. So if after any reflection activity or quality assurance, you can see some gaps in some of these areas, you might want to just highlight one or two of these questions, again, to have a conversation collaboratively with a group of teachers or your leadership team, again, engaging and uniting people around this focus for professional development. So it allows you to think forward now once you've done the reflection on where you currently are. And ultimately, we're talking about habit change here. So we know that habits are really hard. And whenever you will know from your own experiences that when you try to start a new habit, as time passes, it can be really hard to maintain that with the same fidelity and motivation that you might have had at the start. So as with all new habits, there is a risk that it becomes a good intention rather than a habit sustained over time. So we've got to think about what strategies can we put in place to maintain the building of those good habits over time. And this can help with that. So this idea of thinking ahead now, you're half a term in, revisiting what those original goals were when you set out your original PD design. What were you aiming for at the end of the year? What was the plan for that? And are some of these things already not happening? What's the potential for things to go wrong in the future? And again, bringing people together around that sense of a pre-mortem allows for that engagement and uniting people around this sense of if we are going to achieve these long-term goals, then these are the things that we need to see in place, and being really clear about what those habits need to be. What are the things that you need to see consistently, repetitively in your classrooms? And just to come back to really that often when we do that pre-mortem, it links us back to these mechanisms. And again, getting feedback from teachers about what would they like to see more of? Do they need to see more modelling of the technique to give them clarity about what is expected? Would they like an opportunity to have more rehearsal? Do they need more prompts and cues, and what helpful prompts and cues would they like to see at this point? Again, you're combining here the principles of good implementation with the guidance for effective professional development. And these are just some strategies to support you with embedding practice. So facilitating some peer-to-peer observations, again, shrinking the focus. So you just focus on one strategy, supported with a clear set of success criteria, very low stakes, just allowing for that reflection and feedback peer-to-peer. That can work really well if you have a coaching structure in place. Building in those opportunities for individual or group reflection. If you have PD time coming up, it's worth thinking about how reflection can form part of that so that you can, again, look at what has gone well, where are the challenges, where are the enablers, how can we maintain the focus going forward. But it's important that you facilitate that and provide the opportunities for that rather than expecting that that will happen independently. As a leader, you need to provide those opportunities. We know from behaviour change and from adult psychology that we tend to want to be part of the herd, if you like, and we are more likely to enact a behaviour if we see our peers doing that as well. So spotlights and shout outs are a really good way of emphasising that these things are happening and that there is change and movement happening, and that will, again, is a really positive way of bringing people with you and sharing good practice. Again, this is a way to model those things that are going well in classrooms in your school. It seems much more possible when teachers can see it happening in their own setting rather than being something that is brought in from an external place. And again, that pupil feedback can be really empowering and can provide a real good nudge for people. So what are pupils saying is working really well? And what does it look like for pupils in your classrooms? That might be through video, it might be through a focus group, but finding that pupil focus just keeps this on the agenda and again is a way of embedding practice for people. I wanted to share with you what this looks like at Manchester Communication Academy. So this is a structure for a half term for 6 weeks. The whole school launch there would be on one teacher technique. We're currently focusing on oracy. We're in our 2nd year of that now. And so we focus on one technique each half term for that. And we're focusing specifically on listening at the moment. So then within the departments, you can see that in the pink, the department weeks there, that would be refining that whole school launch to make it specific to that subject area, led by subject expert teacher educators. Again, really clear success criteria, opportunities to practice. We do a lot of deliberate practice. So you can see throughout a half term, there are 4 opportunities to rehearse the technique outside of the classroom, but the peer drop-ins allow for that context-specific repetition because you'll be receiving feedback from your peer. So that allows us to embed practice over time and sustain the focus on that whole school idea. Before we finish, I'd just like to give you an opportunity to think about what this means for you now. What are your next steps, key takeaways? Perhaps write down something that you're going to do tomorrow. Maybe think about a meeting or the next professional development opportunity that you might have. As always, please don't hesitate to get in touch with us if we can help. You can email us via our website, Manchester Communication Research School. You can also follow us on social media. I hope that was useful. Thanks very much.